Hello, everybody. Welcome to the joint Boswell Book Company, Porchlight Book Company virtual event series. I'm Daniel from Boswell. Let me hand the mic over to Sally Haldorson, Managing Director of Porchlight Book Company. Hi, Sally.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much. This is an exciting day for me, and I'm sure exciting for everybody who is attending. Hello, all, and welcome to everyone. I'm Sally Haldorson, Managing Director of Porchlight Book Company. We are so privileged to have Katherine May here with us today. She is the New York Times bestselling author of Wintering, The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times, and it is just a week before her new book, Enchantment, Awakening Wonder in an Anxious Age, is available to us in the US. Hi, Katherine.
Hi.
Hi. It's been almost a year since we've had the pleasure of talking with you and learning from you when you released your previous book, The Electricity of Every Living Thing. Last spring, we talked about life post-COVID, and it was very common at the time to refer to it as, getting used to our new normal. It seems that we are still here talking about life post-COVID, wondering if this is now our new normal. I know of many people, and I'm sure many people in the webinar today, who are still feeling disoriented, exhausted, quite pummeled by the last handful of years. Every week, it seems, I say to someone, what is time after all? Or why are things still so hard? And no matter how hard we try to wrangle things into place, they refuse to be wrangled, which is why we're so grateful for your work. In your new book, Enchantment, Awakening Wonder in an Anxious Age, not only are you saying, yes, me too, but also, here's what I think we can do. To read it is to feel seen, and to read it is to feel inspired to claim our struggles and start anew. And so delightfully, you suggest that we deeper our understanding of and our engagement with the natural world in order to reconnect with something greater than us as a gateway to wonder, amazement, and yes, enchantment. I have 1 million things to talk to you about, and we only have 45 minutes, so let's jump
Let's
into
get going.
I know. And let's introduce the folks who have not been so lucky to have the book in hand yet, though pre-ordering. Get on it, people. If you would read a little bit from the book and introduce Enchantment to us all.
No worries. I've got my copy here. I only got them last week, so they still feel really new to me. I'm going to read from a few chapters into the book. I think this chapter captures a little bit about how I'm approaching the idea of enchantment. Just after lunchtime when I was a child, my grandmother would sit down to eat an orange, and peace would fall over the house. In a life without ritual, this was the closest we had. She would settle into her green Chesterfield armchair, its seat cushion long ago recovered with fraying brocade, and lay a square of kitchen paper across her lap. Then she'd start to massage the orange, working it between her bunched knuckles until the skin was lifted from the fruit, before piercing it with a thumbnail and pulling it methodically away. It was the nearest I ever saw her to prayer, sitting reverent in the afternoon light while she eased off the yellow silks of pith and ate, spitting out the occasional pip. Sometimes she'd offer me a segment, but not always. This was her time, her pleasure, and anyway, I never really understood. Oranges were commonplace to me, an ordinary thing that I had to be cajoled into eating with an accompanying saucer of sugar. Lychees excited me in their blush armour, and strawberries too when they were ripe enough. But oranges were mundane, the stuff of the weekly shop. Unlike my grandmother, I never read their ubiquity as abundance. I'd never lived through a time when they were scarce. Yet now in my memory, those moments seem heightened to me, a sacred space. I see the relative darkness of the room, the spritz of orange oil rising against the light of the window. I smell the citrus tang as it fills the quiet air between us. I like to return there in my mind, to imagine that I'm back again in that room. Sometimes I push my thumb into an orange just for the scent of it, and it takes me there. The peace, the spaciousness of an unhurried afternoon, the quality of attention to small things.
That is such a lovely passage that you revisit occasionally in the book, and it actually relates to a question that I'd like to open with. And the subtitle of Enchantment notes particularly our anxious age. And in the section, in one of the opening sections, you write, quote, "Danger, when it is always imminent, does harm. It doesn't need to actually arrive. You exhaust yourself in the act of forever looking over your shoulder. Your body readies itself to fight and never quite discharges that chemical cocktail. You channel it instead into anger and self-pity and anxiety and hopelessness. You divert it into work, but really what you do with every fiber of your being is watch. You are incessantly, exhaustingly alert. You don't dare ever let up, just in case the danger takes advantage of your inattention." Unquote. I feel like you captured my life in a few lines here, and I'm sure many people on our call today recognize that feeling. Collectively, we're calling it burnout or hypervigilance or even the hustle. We need to stop, but we're afraid to stop. Can you talk about how grounding yourself, quite literally, especially in this first section of your book, and quieting the brain through meditation or even paying close attention to something like peeling an orange, can act as antidote to our anxiety, a way to recalibrate our nervous system?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you talk about the subtitle, because actually a lot of the words that you raised as alternatives were alternatives that we thought about slotting in. There could have been a lot of words that went in there. Yeah, so I kind of open the book with that sense that I think will feel familiar to a lot of people of, I don't know, of that intense sense of distraction by the constant news cycle and the fears that have, that seem far away, and the danger that's come very close to us. And I think it's important to acknowledge that for loads of people, the physical effects are still really with them from this pandemic. It's not necessarily imaginary. And I suppose I was looking early on in writing the book for ways to immediately ground myself, and I just turned to the things that I knew, to the familiar things, to the kind of small things of the everyday that I knew were comforting. And for me, that was things like holding a stone, going for a walk, like on a very, very simple level, just moving. And yes, the thought of the orange loomed up in my mind, and as it so often has. And it's a sort of old technique to go to your happy place, if you like.
Right.
But I really felt like that moment was something that I could replay in my mind over and over again. And it occurred to me that actually it was something I could physically do to make contact with a sensory object that was really beautiful and that was probably, it's probably sitting in everybody's fruit bowl, but also that was connected to meaning for me. That was an act of meaning making and an act of connecting across time. And that, I think, set a lot of the tone for how I began to see this idea of enchantment.
That's the back last year when I was preparing to talk to you after reading Wintering, and in our first conversation about the electricity of every living thing, I wrote a little promo piece that said that was about the elemental nature of your writing. And here we are with Enchantment, which reads like a collection of vignettes organized into 4 sections: earth, water, fire, and air. These very essential forces on our everyday lives, on our existence. Can you talk a bit about the structure of the book and whether that structure was revealed to you while you're writing, or whether you set out to construct that with these themes in mind?
Yeah.
I'm really fascinated. Once I finished the book and I was reading your acknowledgments, which yes, people do, right? You mentioned something. You wrote to someone who said, "Thank you for letting me know my first idea wouldn't work," or something to that effect.
Yes. Yeah.
so, so I'm really
Yeah.
interested. You know, we will get to talking much more about enchantment and magic and all the things, but I am interested in the sort of practical concerns about how this book came to be.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really difficult book to write, and as is common with me, I found the structure late in the process of writing the book. I tend to throw a lot of things at my books and then organise them afterwards. And I kind of, I guess there's an edit where I go in and ask the text like what it's trying to tell me. Maybe that's too, I mean, I knew what I wanted to say, but it's the movement of the book and the process of that the reader makes through the book that maybe comes late to me. Like, what path am I trying to light up here? How am I trying to guide people through? And it was really obvious when I looked at it that I was talking about the elements without organizing it around the elements. And so there was a really sort of satisfying edit that I did where I thought, oh right, this okay, I can see the order that this goes in now, because I do often write very much out of order. I think I'm quite chaotic in my process, and I throw away a lot. And yes, there is a thank you to someone who explained to me why my book wasn't working, because I'd originally set out to write a book about humility and the kind of the value of humility and how important it was, which still I think comes into Enchantment. But I'd done, as I always do, an absolute ton of research, and I was writing into it, and I kept hitting these snags, these kind of really problematic elements about humility itself, which was that the more I researched into it, two things cropped up. One was that I realized that this kind of pattern we were in of praising colonial subjects for their humility, essentially, and it was a word that had so often been used by white people to say thank you for not killing us, you know. Thank you for protesting peacefully, for example. And I was really troubled by that. I couldn't write the book without acknowledging that history because it was so evident to me, but I also saw that I wasn't the person to write the book, and that wasn't really the kind of book I was seeking to write. So I was very troubled by that. But also I was troubled by this writing about humility in this moment when so many people felt like so much had been taken away from them, and was it the moment to say to people, be small, you know? And so Richard, who's an academic philosopher, who actually gave me a bit of a hand with wintering as well. He gave me a little nudge in the right direction with wintering. So I returned to him and said, I am in such a tangle. Talk to me about how philosophy sees humility. And he wrote back and said, it's an unapproachable subject. It's always a problem because the wrong people get told to be humble, and the people who need to be more humble don't hear the message.
Right.
And it's impossible to unpick who tells who. It becomes a power relationship. And it made it really, really clear to me that I couldn't deliver this book in the way that I wanted to, which was supposed to be like heartwarming and inspiring. And so it was a mess. It was a mess.
Yes.
It was a disaster waiting to happen. And so that threw me into disarray. But I salvaged the bits that were really important. I regret letting the dog in now, if you can hear her. Oh. And
you don't regret it at all.
Raggle, come here. And I also, she might have a starring role now. I also began to write extra bits. So it became a sort of a very open-ended project at that point, and gradually I found what I was really trying to say, which was like, we are small in a very, very big world, and we can find wonder from that experience of being small, and everybody can access that.
That's exactly what I was thinking, was that you did accomplish that in throughout the book, you refer to being or feeling small in relation to the elements and the desirability of that. How that actually feeds us, which is really counterintuitive to the way that we think about, like, boosting ourselves up every day and trying to make an impact, or to all the ways that we're constantly trying to fight against our I guess mortality and how we have a presence in the world. And would you talk a little bit more about how feeling small within the vastness of the elements, maybe the relinquishment of self-importance, of any attachment to our impact in the world, can actually be a balm for our anxiety that we've already talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I think that quite often we avoid feeling small. We can get very freaked out by that sense of our own insignificance in this vast universe that isn't terribly interested in us. I mean, that can really turn us upside down. And I think a lot of us have that experience of being a child and starting to contemplate those really unfathomable concepts like an infinite universe and time that runs infinitely, and what happened before it was, like those huge questions, and scare ourselves off of that kind of contemplation. But actually there's huge comfort for me in sitting with that, almost as like a meditative tool. There's a point early in the book where I talk about something that I do quite often, which is go down to my beach. My beach doesn't belong to me, but my local beach at high tide. And we have a harbour, so you can stand by the harbour and see the line that the sea makes when it recedes, and it's so far above your head when you're there. Like it's. I mean, I get lost in it even as I think about it, but this sense of the sheer volume of water that rolls in twice a day, and that's completely normal to us, and how tiny I am in relation to just this thing that happens 5 minutes from my door that I can go and look at each day. There's something about that calms me, because it talks to me about these enormous systems that are rolling across the world all the time. And it's not that it makes me feel like my concerns don't matter, but it makes me feel part of a much bigger system of not just humanity, but of the natural world. And that for me is a really beautiful idea to sit with, because we can feel so very enormous and so very visible and so very exposed in all of this. And in fact, we're a speck in a good way.
In a good way, right? It's always in a good way. This reminds me completely randomly of something that I saw on Instagram earlier today. There was some retweet of a post or something about how when we were kids, we thought it was all Bigfoot, quicksand, and alien abductions would be the problems of our adulthood, when in actuality, that would be a relief.
Wasn't like that era was very much about those things.
It was.
Like
we had
books,
right? We had collections of books that would tell these tales, which is in some ways the experience I had reading Enchantment, because you do bring in some folklore, and you bring in some fables and tales of when we have that, when we suspend disbelief and we go in search of the magic in that big wide world that we just maybe don't understand and are never meant to. But at the same time, I think one of the things that's so important about this book, and comes through in your other ones, is that you are not treating the human in the story as being separate from the elements, that because we exist in physical bodies and we are in conversation with the elements, with the world, there is no separation really, even if we are a very small part of it. And there's a beautiful goosebumps inducing line in your first section, Earth, quote, "Our bodies have answers to questions that we don't know how to ask." And this seems a through line in all your work, this pull toward the physical. In wintering, you swim. In the electricity, you walk. You come back to the body, your physical experience of living in the world, time and again. And you're always open to the fact that your body makes things complicated. So many of us deal with physical determinants, whether it's a niggle or a debilitating condition that causes us to separate ourselves from our bodies in the world. Why are we so prone to this disconnect, ignoring the answers our bodies wish to give us?
I think some of us separate from our bodies as an act of self-protection, for loads of different reasons. I don't think our bodies have always felt like a safe place to be in this century or the last one. But I also don't think that we always acknowledge the way that intelligence is dispersed throughout our bodies. You know, we think that we exist in our heads, you know, that almost like you could sever our heads and we would still exist.
Yep.
And that's very misleading, actually. And it stops us from acknowledging the sort of multiple intelligences that exist throughout humanity as well. You know, we're not all thinkers. Like, some people's intelligence expressed through their hands or their feet or their voices or their intuition. But we're, you know, our education system trains us into our heads, essentially, and the things that we value are about cognition. And so, yeah, we kind of separate out, and we think that our sense of self resides there too, that our whole identity resides there. And I'm as guilty as that as everybody else. I am no way pretending to be this fantastically embodied practitioner. I wish I was. I definitely live in my head, and I love living in my head.
Yes.
But I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to learn to feel that dispersal. And one of the things that learning does and shows me over and over again when I practice it is that I can merge with the world around me, that I can be integrated in it and I can be a part of it, rather than separate and having some kind of government over it or dominion over it. It shows me that I'm fully sort of, again, like a particle of that bigger system. And you know, that I have no greater rights than any other part of that bigger environment. And that's really important to me. I think that's the kind of guiding light that I try and follow. And I can only go back and practice it over and over again. You know, it's like a message that never quite sinks in somehow, that I'm always happy to go back to my little box where I think that I'm this sort of separate person with control over anything.
I definitely, I feel like that speaks certainly to my experience. I feel like I haven't appreciated the fact that I've had a body until I was almost like I've crested, I've crested my ability to maximize it, I suppose, in the things that I wanted. Like, I'm going to jump into that, which is now going to sound like a pun, and it's not intended to. But you mentioned near your house when you can go out to the beach and you can see the water line of the receded tide, and you talk. You have a section after Earth in the book on water. And those of us who have read Wintering get to re-experience your love of swimming in the sea, and obviously you're the greater appreciation of how you feel your body can connect and be a part of the water when you're in it. And yet at the same time, the section begins with you having to relearn the skill and resurrect the love of being in the water. And when taking swimming lessons as an adult, which I did as well, which is probably why I relate so well. I did, though I never claimed to be a terrific swimmer in the first place. But you write, more importantly, you write, I am not a beginner. I am further back than that, burdened with the work of forgetting what I thought I already knew. And I found this to be quite illustrative of how I feel about life at middle age. That's my joke about
Yeah,
my
big unlearning.
learning
Yeah.
that I have a body at this age. But every time I think I've found the key that will allow me to swim gracefully through this time of my life, I find I'm out of sync and have to rethink what I think I know about formative events, about my belief systems. And relearning is one of those red threads you can kind of pull through this whole book. And it seems particularly germane to life post-COVID. Why is it necessary at this time to maybe forget what we think we know about living and embrace a beginner's mind?
Because the world is so fundamentally changed, and we're changed on, literally on a cellular level. Many of us, our bodies have changed through this time. And not only that, but actually, the world we're in at the moment demands change too. Not only are we dealing with change that's already here, but we also need to find more change, and we need to be ready for that. And unlearning is so much harder than learning something in the first place, because you have to unpick everything, that not just that at the front of your mind, but the stuff that's really sunk in. Imagine unlearning driving now, once you've got to the stage where you're changing. You guys don't change gears, but we change gears, right?
Right.
I can get round a roundabout without thinking now. Whereas when I first started driving, it was like, okay, I've got to change down to first, and then we've got to second, and then we've got to steer at the same time. How does that happen? I can't imagine unlearning that now, but learning to swim properly, which is what I did. Like I'd learned as a child on a very kind of casual basis. And I didn't have a stroke, and I realized I didn't have a strong stroke that I felt confident enough with if I got into trouble. And so going to swimming lessons and learning to swim properly was almost physically painful, because my body thought it knew what it was doing, and I had to keep telling it not to do that, and to try and layer new knowledge over it until it usurped that very embodied knowledge. And it just struck me as I was writing about it, how many of us are unlearning and relearning all over again now, and how much more we have to do. And I wonder even if that's going to be the skill for the kind of mid-century that we're heading towards, that to unpeel what we think we know, what we're sure about, what we're certain is right, and to make it all over again. I think that's going to be key to people who continue to cope with this time.
I think that the what you just said about the swimming lessons brings to the surface again I just keep using the water puns here, and I don't mean to, but I think it highlights again this humility, right? That you intend to as a foundational concept of the book, that we can't be too prideful or we can't be too certain, because now is a time where everything is shifting, and when we respond to it with rigidity, that's when we have these questions of, why can't things be the way they used to, or why is everything so hard? And part of it may be that we ourselves are making it hard because we resist starting anew, which is going to make me leapfrog one of my questions about water, but into the section on fire, because one of the things that surprised me about the book is that I'd go into one of the sections sort of assuming what your point is going to be, and it's just a slightly different. And with fire, you definitely address the danger and sort of the elemental nature of it, but you also treat it as a positive in a way that I think most of us are used to not thinking about it. And that section brought up a memory for me when I was young, and I grew up on a farm, and my father would burn the ditches alongside the fields that hemmed in our driveway. And what lingers about that memory is this sort of incredulousness that anyone would purposely start a fire. and the
Mm,
danger
mm,
of it getting out of control. Like, how do you keep it in the ditch and not in the field? Like, it was very baffling to me. And we stood there, my family and I, on the driveway watching this fire, this controlled fire.
mm,
And
mm,
it has stayed with me for 40 some years. And of course, farmers have been doing that for centuries. Burning is far
yeah.
more efficient than mowing in creating a fresh slate for new growth to grow from. And in this section you talk about that, the embracing of fire in that way. You write,
Mm,
perhaps I shouldn't fear this present day burnout after all. It shows me only that I'm ready to be made again.
yeah.
Guide us through that thought process.
Yeah, fire as a purification, and as a resetting. And I had to think very deeply about what I meant. When I was writing about fire, because obviously it is a thing that many of us see as straightforwardly dangerous and as something that is a menace. And the chapter opens and closes with a dangerous fire, a destructive fire. But I, like you, was thinking, I grew up in a sort of in a village, and so I often watch the farmers burn the stubble at the end of the season. And I was also thinking about indigenous traditions of land management, which have so often relied on managed fires and managed burning, and which are getting lost actually, and to the detriment of the way that the land is behaving.
Mhm.
Um, and I, but I, what I kind of thought most of all was fire as like necessary uh, destruction, as destruction that you might not want or choose, but which visits you anyway and leaves you with a completely changed environment,
Mhm.
and that takes away many of the assumptions and expectations that you live with. Um, but I was also thinking about fire as a kind of force within us, as well as a drive, as um, a kind of desire for the thing that is closest to our heart, and how that can also destroy you if you don't look after it properly.
Mhm.
But sometimes it, if you listen to it, it will burn you to the ground in necessary ways, actually. And I wrote a lot about my own writing background in that chapter, because I was thinking about how this desire to write books that I've never been able to quite make sense of, like where it came from and why it's so compelling. But I wrote the story of how it couldn't be ignored, and that actually it over and over again schooled me in being a beginner. And it takes me back to the beginning every time I start a new project. And I I live with that. I don't always love it. Honestly, I find it really hard. But it also really teaches me a lot of lessons, and again it takes you back to that idea of humility. Like it constantly knocks me down and shows me how imperfect I am, and how I'm not adept at any of the things that I think I am. um, and yeah, it's this necessary force that it's uncontrollable for sure, but it's not bad because it's uncontrollable. It just is. It's just an element.
So, do you have, speaking of writing, and being able to access, maybe clear your mind of your expectations, or maybe past successes, or um, maybe past stumbling blocks, do you have any rituals that you do before you start writing? And yes, we're going to talk about rituals.
um, Actually, I am I'm quite a frustrating writer to ask this question to, because if I have a ritual, it's constantly changing up the circumstance in
Mm,
which I write. Like I
yeah.
feel like I go stale in any one practice or situation. And so I like to write all over the place. I like to sometimes write in bed, and sometimes on the sofa, and sometimes at my desk, and sometimes in a cafe. I like to approach it in different ways. I Yeah, I sometimes write by hand and I sometimes type and I sometimes dictate. Like I'm constantly switching everything up. But I do know that when I am approaching a new project, I tend to walk a lot and I tend to read before I write. There's definitely a phase
Entrance
where
point.
I'm circling. Sorry, I missed
To
that.
create an entrance point.
Yeah, I think of it as circling a topic. Like I will just consume something like really broadly first of all, and I gradually zone in, and I wait until the words come to me. I have never been a very disciplined writer, and that's never worked for me. That just it just runs me dry really quickly if I apply discipline to the situation. So I just keep coming back to it instead. I keep showing up for it until it tells me what to say. Um, which is why it's such a frustrating process for me, perhaps. I don't know.
There's in jumping back into, oh goodness, the water. My goodness.
Jumping into the water.
Yes, it's happening somewhere in my brain that this is happening. In water section, in A Visit to a Healing Well, you write, the well wants to be tended, but the well is also profoundly enigmatic because that's where the invitation ends. Once you're there, you're on your own. It offers no clues for what to do, no liturgy or ceremony. At the bottom of the steps, you must confront your own yearning to make meaning. And a little after, quote, you are the one who fills the well. Now, I think we can take that and apply that to what you just said about writing, right? That you keep showing up. And I think we often want to romanticize and want to be passive recipients of magical moments, whether that's, instance of flow when you're working, or if it's, the walking out into the middle of a field in order to feel whatever there is to be felt, and then being disappointed that I didn't feel anything. You do talk about that later on when you go out to look at the stars, and when you're searching for the rock inspector. There are all of these ways that I think we're scared to pursue the magic because we're concerned about it not being there when we get there. And yet our own willingness to put aside our inhibitions and our expectations, or even our embarrassment in creating these rituals, to showing up, seems to be an essential ingredient with making magic happen.
Yeah, I think it's about repetition, honestly, and to keep returning. And I think we're very badly misled by these Instagrammable moments that we're looking for. You know, the perfect sunset, the perfect moment, the the kind of image of the girl who sits down to meditate in her flawless yoga gear and is just so perfectly peaceful. And I don't know about you, but that stuff rarely happens to me. And yet I still have a right to magic. I have a right to enchantment, and I have a need for enchantment. And so how do we solve that? And the answer for me is to change your expectations of what magic looks like. And one of those expectations might be that it's somehow demonstrable to the outside world. But if you find this magical moment, this point of contact with the universe, that you'll be somehow able to demonstrate it to the person standing next to you, let alone, your assembled friends online, or the next time you're, down the pub with them. And that's not how this actually works in reality. And instead, it's about the interrogation of what we see, and about turning up and wondering what this means, and wondering what fascinates us, and what evokes our curiosity, and what excites us about that experience. And to find that, sometimes in life that will visit you passively and you won't have done anything to conjure it. but most of the time you have to go looking, and you have to go looking, paying full attention. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, the section, because I live near Canterbury, which, as probably most people know, is this, ancient site of pilgrimage, that probably was a site of pilgrimage before the cathedral was built and before Thomas Becket was murdered. And but nevertheless, that's been the event that's made it very significant. And a friend took me to see an old healing well just on the outskirts that's completely hidden behind a rose briar. Although they've cut it down recently, it's a little bit more visible
Oh,
now. I know.
won't lose
I
a
was a bit
raincoat
sad
there
actually.
anymore. Oh.
Yeah, the brambles stole my raincoat. But this place is extraordinary. It's obviously extraordinary the second you see it, and you walk down some steps to this little bowl, stone bowl with a spring that rises into it. And when I first visited it, I was overcome by this sense of awkwardness in the face of it. Like, what do I do here? I don't know. I don't know how to behave in front of a healing well. Like, what do I say? What do I do? Should I have a ritual? But it's so interesting the way that it's almost staged. You go down these steps, and as you go down the steps, you enter a different space, and you can only go down there alone. And you're forced to confront yourself alone with this mirroring water. And yeah, there's something really incredible about that our medieval forebears had clearly worked out, had clearly understood that to go down and have this relationship with a place that is yours and yours only, and almost can't not feel significant because of the sort of setup of this thing. It invites a different thing from you every time.
I'm fascinated by how resistant we are to that, as though we need to know the meaning before we make the journey, right? Like we need to understand the purpose. I'm going to go here for a certain reason, when in actuality, it will tell us what we need to feel from it if we allow that to happen. And I think that's a thing in a world where we're constantly being told what to think. And as I was reading your book, there were a few things that you referenced that I visually was like, well, what is that? What is the Brocken specter, which is another thing you go and search for, and needed to do that kind of, and you're like, 50 years ago, I could never just look this up and find out what this was, back when we were children and we had the books about quicksand because I didn't know, or aliens and all of that.
My books were about Brocken specters.
Exactly. So I think this idea of knowing, we're so confident we just know now, and unlearning that to bring that forward again is really critical to being open to enchantment. While you label enchantment, while I would not label Enchantment as a book about religion or spirituality per se, it is not a book about religion and spirituality. You're clear about your desire for something, some greater meaning to fill a sort of unlabeled void. But you seem to conclude that it's not the church, it's the congregation. It's not the singular God so much as our collective energy. You write, I don't have to believe in God as a person. I can believe in this instead. The entire mesh of existence binding us together in ways we perceive only if we listen. Each of us is a particle of this greater entity. Each one of us contains it all. And how did you reckon with how much of this, our historical accepted either or refused feelings about religion and spirituality and searching for like myth and meaning while you were writing the book? Did you?
Oh, a lot. a lot.
You're like, do I go here? No. Do I not?
I mean, there's lots of cut material that went on about it even more. But no, it was honestly, like I always write books when I'm trying to figure something out. They always, you know, center on an authentic inquiry. And for me, I was really trying to unpick this, I don't know, like creeping belief in something, and my desire for that to be something I at least understood, you know, that I understood what the belief was in. Um, and so yeah, I interrogate it quite a lot in the book, and to the extent that, you know, even as you read that, I think, oh my God, did I say that out loud? You know, it feels really intimate and personal to me to share that thought process. But and everyone comes at this from a different point, but I'm no longer able in my life to live in denial of my sense of a kind of broader spiritual sense of the world. But I think that will always remain quite diffuse for me. I don't think that I will ever be the kind of person who can kind of comfortably invest in a personal God, or something that even has like a set liturgy or meaning or belief system. I think one of the things I realized is that for me, the uncertainty is the thing, actually, the thing that makes it so wondrous and mysterious, that it is so unknowable and so elusive, and that as soon as you try and pin it down with language or storytelling or however we apply ourselves to it, that it disappears. It's like smoke between your fingers. Right. And I end up quoting Octavia Butler about the worship of change, that change itself it can be a god to us, and that we can build meaning around those shifting sands ultimately.
One of the ways that wintering came to me during a time that I very much needed it. And I might have mentioned this in our first conversation, but my husband was quite ill, and he was not going to live his future life in the same way that he was living his past life, despite the joys of recovery and all the things that you know, we're very happy about. And I think that the message with wintering was that we don't necessarily have to resist seasons of quiet or seasons of refueling, recharging, or even just accept, maybe with all of us aging, that we don't necessarily have to give into that good night, but that we can also be okay with slowing down, and because there's a way to find beauty in that. And I think that there is one of the calls in this book is for our own agency in pursuing enchantment. And that seems like such, again, we want to maybe be sort of passive recipients to, you know, and God came down, or, you know, the
something gets revealed to us. It's like, oh, I get it now. Thanks.
Yep. Now everything is better, right? And now I understand truth. But you say that the quest is the point, that our participation in this is the point. And oddly, I was reading the book this weekend while I was thinking about taking my dogs for a walk. And I was really dreading it because, we're going to walk around the block, and, you know, it's going to be the same. And I was like, Sally, you can get in the car and you can drive somewhere else and walk the dog somewhere else. And oddly related me back to this idea that, like, we have a choice in this matter. We have a choice of how much we want to engage with the wonders of our existence. And do you feel like that is like how much we want it and how much we are willing to get out of the house and go looking for it is critical to our experience of enchantment?
Yeah, and I think importantly, you don't have to go very far. I mean, I think we either try and live lives that don't engage with these bigger questions, and that deliberately kind of numb ourselves to them, which many people do, absolutely fine by me.
Mhm.
But when we often talk about questing, if you like, if that's not too grand a term, or spiritual seeking, or actually looking for awe and wonder, um, we talk about always that it's found somewhere else, like it's found on a mountainside in Switzerland, or I don't know, in the rainforest in Brazil, or
Right.
like, or in Antarctica, or whatever. Like we position this revelation somewhere else, and somewhere that's exotic to wherever we live, somewhere that's other, somewhere that's more dramatic than home. And I mean, I think that's a funny kind of a nonsense, because everyone's going somewhere else to find
Mhm.
it. So that clearly means it's not located anywhere in
Right.
particular. But also, that's so exclusionary of so many people.
Mhm.
And, like myself included, I mean, I've been dealing for the last 8 weeks with a major flare up of a chronic illness that has completely kept me, like, not just near home, but in my house most of the time. And whole lives are lived in that way. And historically, people couldn't travel very far. And so, do we believe that for the whole of history, most people could never find wonder or enchantment? No, we don't. That's not true. Do we believe that only people who are able bodied and, let's face it, wealthy are entitled to enchantment? No, we don't believe that when we think about it. And so, let's start looking close to home. Let's start finding that wonder and identifying it and reconnecting with that sense of fascination that leads us to it. And in actual fact, like, the whole universe is unfolding around us all the time. We only have to look in the night sky every night. It's right there. We can see other planets with our naked eye. We can see stars. We can see the moon, which is this most extraordinary thing and which has such huge influence on our planet. We can see the sun. Those things are huge, and those things are absolutely a life's work to contemplate if we let ourselves do it, if we allow ourselves to feel that, and drop our expectation that enchantment is found elsewhere.
Mhm.
It's not. It's right there waiting for you in your backyard.
And in fact, I think the in the air, which is the last of the sections
Yes.
we haven't yet
Yeah.
touched on, and which is all around us all the time. And I think um, that is one of the things that surprised me about the section on air. I went into the section thinking we'd be maybe talking more about the wind or more about breath and less about
Mm.
sound for some reason, or our own um, ability to interpret everything around us. And I think that the takeaway of that section is that we must become better listeners. And
Mm.
whether that's to the sound of the bees or to the wind in the leaves or to the stories that connect us to the history and to each other. And you write, there's so much that we don't hear. The air is full of information. We just have to find the right way to listen. And um, when we go, when we walk outside our back door, we have that opportunity, seems to be reinforcing what you just said about our access. We don't have to get on a plane and
Mm.
fly to wherever it is
Somewhere,
think
somewhere
magic
amazing.
lives, right?
Yeah.
But that it actually surrounds us in that same way that air does.
Yeah, that's funny enough. In the archaeology of the book, that is the oldest sentence. The air is full of information. I think I wrote that in my notebook in about 2016, after visiting the sound listening ears, as we call them, at Dungeness, which are these very, very early sonar, and they're literally massive concrete ears that kind of stick out of the landscape to catch radio signals going across the channel. And yeah, that is the earliest seed of this book. Like,
Wow.
even when we're doing nothing, we are surrounded by hidden information. And isn't that just extraordinary? Like, to stand by those concrete discs, parabolas, is to kind of suddenly understand what a sound wave is. And here is a thing that physically catches a sound wave that's traveling 20, 30 miles. And just that thought is extraordinary to me, because it's so abstract, and yet there it is, like literally made concrete. That here is the point where the sound wave is discernible, and you can listen to it. And yeah, I think my books take a long time to form, and I really think that was the earliest little kernel of beginning to wonder about where wonder exists, where we can find it, where we can listen out for it. And yeah, it's right there.
Yeah, and I think where wonder exists is answered in this other line from the book that says, it's all there waiting for our attention, as
Yeah.
is this book. And unfortunately, our time is talking
Beautiful
about the book
segue.
is over. But I know readers will feel so enriched by reading it, because this book will be available to us, to everyone, in the coming week. But that does not mean that Wonder and Enchantment is not available to us immediately. And I cannot tell you how much of a pleasure it is to read your work, to talk with you. Everyone should go search out all of the wonderful content that Katherine is creating online with readers, with writers. You have quite a community out there, and for all the searchers in the world, I think that is a wonderful place to travel to.
Thank you. It's been so lovely talking to you. It's just such an interesting conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you.
We should probably mention that the book comes out next Tuesday. So February 28th, Enchantment, beautiful edition that it is. I don't even have my hardcover. I'm quite jealous of you. And thank you for a beautiful hour, and we're so grateful to be part of this.